If you think HOA horror stories couldn't get any worse, wait until you hear how I dealt with Karen showing up uninvited at my cabin with her entire entourage, because what I did next will either make you cheer or clutch your pearls. Before we dive into this wild ride of pettiness, revenge, and a battle of wills in the deep woods, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the craziest neighborhood stories that you'll wish were fiction. I bought the cabin to escape everything the HOA represented: rules, gossip, micromanagement, and above all, people like Karen, the self-appointed queen of the community who thrived on confrontation and drama. My cabin wasn't even under the HOA's jurisdiction, which was part of the appeal. Tucked away deep in the woods, accessible only by a gravel road with a gate I had installed myself, it was supposed to be my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude where no one could tell me the color I should paint my mailbox or how high my grass could grow. I had deliberately never given out directions to anyone from the neighborhood, because the whole point was to be alone, and yet one quiet Friday evening as the sun was sinking behind the pines and I was settling into my favorite chair with a mug of coffee and the intention of a long, silent weekend of reading and hiking, I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel, a sound that should never have been there. At first, I thought maybe a lost hiker had pulled in, but when I peered through the blinds I saw Karen's SUV crawling up my drive, headlights bouncing against the trees, and to my disbelief, she wasn't alone. Another car followed behind hers, and then another, an entire convoy like she had organized a field trip, and sure enough when the cars finally stopped in my clearing, out spilled not just Karen but a gaggle of people I recognized vaguely from HOA meetings and neighborhood gossip circles, all dressed like they were about to enjoy a resort getaway instead of trespassing onto someone else's private land. My blood boiled instantly, because if there was one place I hadn't wanted her claws to reach, it was here, and yet here she was, chirping instructions, waving her hands like she owned the place, as if she had invited everyone to her personal retreat. I didn't go out right away. Instead, I flicked off every light in the cabin and slipped quietly outside through the back, circling toward the gate, because if she thought she could waltz in with her guests and treat my sanctuary like a community clubhouse, she had another thing coming. By the time she had everyone lugging coolers and folding chairs out of the trunks, I was already at the gate, pulling it shut with a clang and snapping the lock into place, effectively trapping them on my property but cutting off any other would-be guests she might have had on the way. Then I doubled back, crouching low behind the brush, watching as confusion began to ripple through the group when they realized the lights inside the cabin had gone dark. Karen, of course, was the loudest, shouting my name, calling it a neighborly visit, insisting they were here for a fun weekend, since apparently she had taken it upon herself to borrow my cabin for some HOA social retreat, claiming that I never used it enough and that it was selfish of me to keep it all to myself. The audacity of this woman left me momentarily speechless, but then something colder settled in my chest, a determination that if she wanted a war, she was going to get one. I stayed silent, letting the crickets and the wind answer her instead, and I could see the unease grow in the others, who had clearly expected a warm welcome, maybe some drinks on the deck, not to be standing in the middle of a dark clearing with their supposed hostess nowhere to be found. Karen kept calling, her voice growing shriller, until she pulled out her phone and tried to dial me, but of course there was no signal this deep in the woods, and that was when I decided to lean into the eeriness of it all. I slipped into the shed, grabbed the old lantern that cast more shadows than light, and positioned it on a stump just beyond the tree line, so it glowed faintly in the dark like some kind of ghostly beacon. When one of the guests noticed and pointed it out, murmurs rippled through the group, and Karen, ever the control freak, marched toward it with her flashlight, muttering about rude pranks. I let her get just close enough, then shifted a branch, letting it crack loudly, and the way she froze told me she wasn't nearly as fearless as she pretended. She called out again, trying to mask the quiver in her voice, demanding that I stop, acting like a child, and come out, but I stayed hidden, watching her frustration grow. Minutes stretched into an hour, the group's enthusiasm draining as the reality of the situation set in. They were in the woods, at night, cut off from cell service, with no access to the locked cabin, and the only light came from the moon above and the occasional flicker of that eerie lantern. I could tell the guests were getting restless, some whispering that maybe they should leave, but Karen dug in, insisting they were welcome here, because she had arranged it. That was when I realized the delicious irony. She had told them I had agreed to this, probably painted me as the generous neighbor who had offered up his place for their retreat, when in reality she had lied to everyone to boost her own status. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to unravel her little plan in the most uncomfortable way possible. So I let the hours crawl, occasionally snapping a twig, rustling a bush, making them jump, feeding the paranoia until even the most loyal HOA cronies were questioning her. Then, just before midnight, I finally made my move. I stepped out of the shadows near the porch, silent as a ghost, and when one of the guests spotted me and gasped, all eyes turned, their faces pale in the moonlight. I didn't speak right away, just stared, letting the silence stretch until Karen, ever unable to relinquish control, snapped at me, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. That was when I finally let the words out, low and calm. "This is my cabin. You don't belong here." The effect was immediate. The guests shifted uneasily, some muttering apologies, clearly realizing they had been duped, but Karen doubled down, claiming she had every right, that the community had a right, that I was being selfish and unneighborly. I laughed, sharp and humorless, and told them all plainly that not only were they trespassing, but I had the entire approach road locked and no one was leaving until morning, which made several people's eyes widen. I could see the cracks forming in her little empire as her guests turned on her, whispering that this was crazy, that they never signed up for this, and when I reminded them that technically, what they had done was breaking and entering, the fear in their expressions deepened. Karen, though, puffed up like a cornered cat, shrieking about lawsuits and community bylaws that had no power out here in the woods. I let her rant, because the more she talked, the more her followers peeled away from her, setting their chairs back in the cars, muttering that they were leaving at first light. Eventually, one by one, they retreated to their vehicles, locking the doors, trying to sleep off the nightmare, leaving Karen fuming in the clearing, her power stripped bare. I didn't bother going back inside. I stayed on the porch with my lantern, keeping watch like a sentinel. Letting her stew. By dawn, most of them were gone the second I unlocked the gate, refusing to make eye contact as they drove off, ashamed of their involvement. Karen was the last, still trying to bark threats at me, but her voice cracked with exhaustion, and when she finally left, tires spitting gravel in frustration, I knew I had won. But the story didn't end there, because when the HOA meeting rolled around the following week, word of what she had done had spread like wildfire, and this time she wasn't the center of attention, she was the punchline. Her carefully curated reputation as the neighborhood's queen bee crumbled, replaced by whispers of how she had lied, manipulated, and dragged people into a humiliating disaster. For once, the HOA sided with me, acknowledging that my cabin was outside their reach, that what she had done was a gross overstep, and though she tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, no one bought it. Watching her squirm under the weight of her own arrogance was better than any revenge I could have planned. My cabin, my sanctuary, remained untouched, and Karen never dared set foot near it again, but every so often I catch her glaring at me from across the street in the neighborhood, still seething, still plotting, still unable to accept that for once, she wasn't the one in control. And every time I see that glare, I just smile, because I know one truth she can't stand to face. In the battle of Karen versus the cabin, the woods swallowed her pride whole, and I never even had to raise my voice.